So we're going to continue talking about formatting. In this movie, we're going to talk about formatting dates and times. We'll start with the date formats, the options that we have to format dates. And then we'll look at some time formatting options. And then we're going to talk about the date serial number. It's going to explain how we get from an integer to a date. And because dates are values, we can perform math on the dates. And finally, we're going to look at formatting the cells before we enter a value that's going to be a date, or we can format the cells while we're entering the value, depending upon how we enter the content into the cell. So formatting dates and times. We're going to continue using the drop-down menu in the number group on the Home tab. And we're also going to continue using 5,000, the number 5,000. That's what we used in the prior movie. And if you remember, in the prior movie, when we dropped down the menu to see the number options, the short date had a date. And I mentioned at the time that I was going to explain how we get from the number 5,000 to a date, September 8th, 1913. And I'm going to do that. I'm just not going to do it right now. I'm going to instead format that using the short date format. And on the drop down, we also have the option to use the long date format, which spells out the day of the week and the month. But we can launch the Format Cells dialog box, and it automatically opens up in the number group with the date category selected and with the formatting type selected, that it's a formatting that was used in the active cell when I launched this dialog box. So there are a lot of other options when it comes to formatting a cell with dates. You can see them all listed here. In fact, some of them include formatting the cell using a date and a time. I'm going to cancel out of that, and we're going to go to times. Now, if 5,000 becomes a date, and that's Monday, September 8, 1913, how then do I convert this to a time? Well, I'm going to show you what time that is. It's 12 a.m. It's the beginning of the day. And what day is it the beginning of? Monday, September 8, 1913. And I'm going to explain how we get from a number to a date and a time. But just to build the suspense a little more, before we do that, we have some other time formatting options. And once again, the Format Cells dialog box opens on the number tab, the time category selected, and the format that's applied in terms of time is also highlighted. But we have some other options. We have military time, we can display seconds, and we have this special formatting option that may look like it makes no sense at all, which actually formats in terms of the passage of time. And we're going to get to that in a couple of minutes. And once again, we have the date and time options just like we did on the date type list. I'm going to cancel out of that and end the suspense about the serial numbering system as it is associated with dates. The serial numbering system begins on January 1st, 1900. That corresponds to the number 1. So when I convert this format to a date, it's January 1st, 1900. So what is 2? That's right, it's January 2nd, 1900. I heard somebody say it. The only thing about the serial numbering system is that it's wrong. It's wrong in that it accounts for February 29th, 1900 happening, and it actually didn't. That wasn't a leap year. A year is about 15 minutes shorter than 365 and a quarter days. So every 400 years, we skip a leap year to keep our calendars in sync with the orbital periods for the planets. So the number 367 is, I heard somebody else say it, it's January 1st, 1901. Because if Excel thinks that 1900 was a leap year, that's going to be 366 days, and the 367th day is going to be January 1st, 1901. We can convert these numbers to the long date format, and we're going to get the same result, only spelled out the days of the week and the months of the year. So this brings us back again to times. And I'm going to select E5 as the active cell, and you can see in the formula bar that it's September 8th, 1913, 12 a.m. because the number that was in here was 5,000 that I converted to the date and time formatting. So why is it 12 a.m.? Because 5,000 was an integer. It's a whole number. It's a whole day. So it's the beginning of the day, September 8, 1913, 12 a.m. So the time portion of this number, this integer, is a fractional portion of a day. And since it was an integer, a whole number, there was no fractional portion of a day that elapsed. But 0.25 converted to a time is going to be 25% of a day, which is 6 a.m. Half the day is going to be 12 noon. And 2000.25 is going to be the 2000th day after January 1st, 1900, plus the passage of a quarter of that day, which is going to be 6 a.m., and I don't know what date that's going to be. It's June 22nd, 1905. So I can express this number, 2000.25, as either a date or a time, or a date and a time. Because I've got it set to be time right now, but I can change it to a date, or I can change it to a time, like we had, or I can change it to a date and a time. Because Excel is remembering, is storing that original value, which was 2000.25. So because dates are stored as values, and they're just converted to dates by virtue of the formatting that you select, we can perform math on the values. So we know from what we did above that 1 is January 1st, 1900, 367 is January 1st, 1901, and I've subtracted these two numbers. The difference between those two numbers obviously is 366, but when I convert these two numbers to a date format, I still get the same result. I still get 366 because Excel is performing math on the number that's stored, that's being formatted as a date in those two cells. So copying and pasting, I get the same result on the numbers themselves, and of course when I convert these to the long date format, I still get the same result. So times are a little funny. If I have 0.5 and 2.5, and I express those values as a time, 0.5 and 2.5, I get 12 noon both times, because the format for a fractional day, 0.5, is 12 noon. It doesn't matter if it's today, last week, 100 years from now, it's still 12 noon. So what that means is, copying this formula over, is my same math that I'm performing on those values, which is 0.5 and 2.5, the difference between those is 2. And when I convert that to a time, I get 12 a.m. So obviously it doesn't make sense that 12 noon minus 12 noon is 12 a.m. So what I'm really after is the passage of time. You can get that by launching the Format Cells dialog box and going to this format option, which I mentioned earlier. Looks a little strange. Why it's 37, I couldn't tell you, but when I left click OK, I get what I'm after. I get the passage of time. So it takes into account the fact that this 12 p.m. is 12 noon the day before January 1st, 1900, and this 12 p.m. is 12 noon on January 2nd, 1900. And the difference between those two is 48 hours. So we can format the cells after we enter content, or we can have the cells formatted before we enter the content. This is a little bit of review, but repetition can't hurt in terms of learning. So this is formatted as a date. When I enter a number in there, and tab over, 1 is January 1st, 1900. This is the long date format, Sunday, January 1st, 1900. And this is a time format. 0.25 is going to be 6 a.m. We can also format the cell while we're entering content, depending upon how we do it. And this was also covered in another movie. Just to give one example, if I enter the number 1 in the general formatting, it's going to be the number 1. But if I enter 1231, Control Enter, Excel will express that number as a date. And there's a whole bunch of ways to enter dates and times and have the formatting of the cell controlled by the way you're entering the content, so that it will be expressed and shown as a date or a time. So those are date formats, time formats, an explanation of the serial numbering system, performing a little math with dates, and a demonstration, sort of a review of formatting the cells before we enter content and formatting the cells while we're entering the content.